Hi, everyone. I am Steve Kepp, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited about this topic, which I will tell you about in a moment. But before we get started, I want to share something special we have for today's attendees. Our next monthly virtual conference is coming up on Wednesday, August 18th, and it's titled Learning from a Crisis About What Working Parents Need. It's going to be quite valuable to HR leaders who want to know more about what the parents on their teams want in terms of support right now. Thanks to our partners and today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those of you who've joined the webinar today. I'm putting a link in the chat right now. You'll want to take advantage of this one since the regular price for our conference tickets is $149. And this link will give you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. Okay, today we'll be exploring the topic 4 ways data-focused talent acquisition teams differ. In the best of times, talent acquisition is a data-heavy operation, but in more challenging hiring environments like these, data can help talent teams to create more predictable results. Using evidence to generate insights, talent teams can build stronger stakeholder relationships, they can target specific hiring goals, and they can know in advance what types of response to expect from different kinds of hiring activities. In this session, Ben Eubanks, the Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research and Advisory, will share findings from new research on how data-focused talent acquisition teams differ from their peers. This isn't just about comparing and contrasting. It's also about offering you a roadmap to creating a more data-driven talent function. Our sponsor today is Lever. I'll tell you a bit about them. Lever is a talent acquisition suite that provides talent leaders with the solutions they need to source and build strong relationships with their candidates. Data-driven recruiting is crucial to increasing company success in all recruiting efforts. By harnessing real-time analytics in hiring, teams can remove unconscious bias. They can understand where they're falling short in the interview process, and they can determine the number of candidates needed to meet their goals. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on demand soon after the event. So you could look out for an email in about 24 hours with that link. The email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromday1.co. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Ben Eubanks of Lighthouse Research and Advisory. Ben is an expert on the future of work as it relates to talent, technology, and innovation. His speaking has reached over 100,000 business leaders in the last 10 years on both physical and virtual stages. He's coming to you from Huntsville, Alabama, which has so many rocket scientists and residents that it's known as Rocket City, USA. All right, with that bit of local color, Ben, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. And hey, everyone, welcome to be here, or glad to have you here. And I'm so glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation and sharing some stories, sharing some data, some research with you, and really helping to paint this picture that we all can be better at measuring the outcomes, the outputs, and driving better predictability, as we kind of teased there in the intro for the session, with data. So I'm going to tell you a quick story. One of the things that I try to do, I'll be sharing with you again, lots of evidence and things. Take a lot of notes as we're going through here. We'll get you the slides after we're done, but take some notes and things as we go through the things that really resonate with you. But I also am going to give you some encouragement, some inspiration. So I'm going to let me get my deck up here for you so everybody can see this. All right. And I'm getting excited. Sorry, I'll calm it down. So I'm going to tell you a story really quick. There was a teacher a couple years ago that was going to run a competition for her students. And this teacher decided that she was going to have them go through and make the best pot, the best item they could in the sculpting class. So she broke them into 2 groups. In the first group, she said, I want you to study and plan and think and learn about the best practices and examine all these other amazing artists and sculptors. And after 30 days, I want you to make the best and most amazing pot that you can. And for the other group, the second group, she said, I want you to start making a pot every day. I just get in there, get your hands dirty, start doing it. And at the end of the 30 days, you pick the one that you think is best and you submit that. And we'll see which group submits better items. And inevitably, when it came time to judge and pick the best ones, she found that the second group created and delivered better better items, better outputs there. And the encouragement here, right, you might be able to sort of see the parallel. The encouragement there is get started. You're going to do some things right. You're going to do some things wrong. You're going to misstep occasionally. Yes, non-fatal failures are okay. But as we're going through today, I want to give you a lot of, again, things to help you think about this and things to bolster the business case for using data in your TA function to do better and to be better and to deliver better results for your candidates and for the business. In all of those things, though, I'm going to just give you this encouragement. And so here's one story to start with. I'll have other ones as we go through to really paint this picture. So before we go any farther, let me look at my slides. Here we go. So before we go any further, you heard a little bit about me, just a quick set of intros because I'm a researcher now. That is how I spend my days. I get a chance to do two kinds of research. On one side, I get to look at the technologies, the tools, how we're serving the employees and the candidates across learning and talent and HR and onboarding and all those different things that we can do with technology. I get to look at those, and it's so much fun to be able to understand what's out there, what innovation's happening. On the flip side, though, I also get a chance to actually do research, as you'll hear from today, on trends, best practices, what high-performing companies are doing that we can all learn from. So it's so much fun to bring those things together, not just because I love data and numbers and evidence, as I'll say that lots of times, but also because I started my career in HR and recruiting. And it was an amazing experience. It's the thing that I treasure the most. But the reason I stepped over to the research side is because I wanted to make a bigger impact on our community, on our profession, and help leaders just like you to make better decisions day to day. So that's how I got to where I am. The road led here. I'm the author of a book called Artificial Intelligence for HR, which sounds like, I'll admit, the most dry and boring textbook you could ever find. But it's actually a handbook for how to make work more human. If we use technology and use tools to help us automate some of the things that we don't want to spend our time on or shouldn't be spending our time on, we can spend our time on the things that really matter and create better experiences for our people. And then I'm also the host of a couple different shows, podcasts, things like that. It's a chance for me to, you'll learn I like to talk a lot, and it gives me a chance to talk and learn and explore these different topics and things I'm curious about in different kinds of contexts and things like that. So today's conversation is going to be pulled from some of the key things we're going to talk about are pulled from some research we did this year. And you probably already figured out I'm not the standard very dry researcher. I love to weave stories in. And so I've made it a very specific intent that I'm only going to share with you a couple of specific charts and graphs in this conversation. I don't want to, overwhelm you with lots of those things. I'll share a couple with you that really make some key points in a minute. But I think the more powerful thing is to figure out how to take these things we're learning in the data and take action on them. So just really quick, here's the scope of the research. We talked to over 800 companies, TA leaders, just like yourself. Maybe some of you were even respondents, who knows, across different range of industries, different range of companies. And the topics of that research ran the gamut. We asked about how did your talent technology fail you in the last year? We looked at what skills are important for your teams. We'll talk about that in the research today. Automation, unbiased hiring, how do we balance fairness and automation in the hiring process, mobility, moving people in and through the business. So lots of fun things that is covered. And today, again, we're going to really focus on the data piece of that. So before I go any further, I've got one quick poll embedded in this conversation today. And Kristen, if you want to throw that up there for everybody, we're going to talk about data, and there's a spectrum like everything in life. So where are you on that spectrum, your organization? Are you on we're kind of casually using it. If someone asks for it, we'll go for it. On the other end, it's, hey, we use this every day. We're weaving it in. We're always looking for new things to be leveraging. We're on the cutting edge. Or are you somewhere in the middle between those two extremes on that range? And I can't actually see how many people are responding. So Kristen, whenever we've got a kind of a critical mass of people there, just let me know and we can shut that down. Oh, beautiful. Awesome. So we have here about 40% or more casual ad hoc, 10% are very, very advanced, cutting edge. You're really thinking about it strategically. And then the majority, 51%, barely a majority, are right there in the middle. And this is kind of what I expected to see. In the research, we actually had a very similar set of responses. All of us know, like we could stand to do better, be better, but we fall somewhere in this broad spectrum. So really quick, I want to talk to each of you, regardless of where you answered there. I want to give you a quick snippet. If you are a little more ad hoc, if you said, hey, we're just kind of in the early stages of this, throughout the conversation today, I'm going to give you some tools and some ideas and some ways to take this stuff and really put it into practice in some small measurable chunks. If you are on the cutting edge side, you're more adept, We use ad hoc and adept to describe those two ranges. If you're adept and you're doing this well, I'll give you some ideas of areas where you might not have even realized you might be getting some outcomes that are really exciting and really powerful. And then if you're somewhere in the middle where the majority of you were, I'm going to give you some, as I mentioned, not just stories and things to really illustrate this. I'll tell you about some companies that started from very ad hoc, very informal to a rigorous and formal approach to measurement on the TA side. And I'll give you some encouragement as we go through as well. So lots of good stuff in store. One of the key things that I have learned is that what we believe drives what we do. And nothing paints that picture more clearly for me. A year and a half ago, right before the pandemic, we had done some research with different TA leaders at large companies, and we asked them about what sort of skills matter for their recruiting teams. Okay, what sort of skills matter for you and your job, essentially. And what was intriguing is when we looked at the data, there were a percentage of companies that didn't say that things like analytical skills or technology skills or communication skills were important. There were some people that said those were not a big priority. And I'll tell you, I usually know in general what to expect. I've been around the space. I've been in your seat. So I thought I knew what to expect. And that surprised me. I was very stumped. So I actually went back through the data and I was trying to figure out what explains this. Why would someone not say that those skills are important for a recruiter? And what I found was there was a question in there where if I cut it by that question, everything changed. So the question was, do you think that automation and AI and technology are going to change the work that we do as recruiters? If someone said, it's all hype, then they're more likely to say that these other skills don't matter. But if someone said, yes, those are going to change the role, we're going to have to do different things, we're going to have to learn different things, they're much more likely to lean into those other types of developing and emerging skills for recruiters and talent leaders. So the thing that they believed drove what they did after the fact. And so as we're going through again today, obviously the conversation is focused specifically on data and metrics and using evidence to tell our stories and prove our value to the business. So I want you to believe that these things can work, that they do work, and that you can do them just like any of these other organizations we talk about today. That you can do this because it's absolutely possible. There we go. So overall, here's the three things we're gonna run across. I'm going to start off with the research. I love to get you a couple of those things right away. So we've got 4 different data points we're going to talk about from the headline today. 4 ways that those adept organizations differ from others. So we're going to step into some innovative practices, we'll just say. We know that the data is important. So what sort of steps can we take? What sort of other opportunities are there out there to measure? I'll give you one that probably every single one of us have used or using currently or have used in the past to measure the effectiveness of our recruiting activities. And I'll explain why that one's probably not the best one and some of the ways that it can be better. And then I'll share some stories. I'll weave those in. So it's not just Ben's opinion of the world or Ben's perspective or even just the research, but actual examples of companies and how they're doing these things and how they're weaving this together. So I'm hoping to give you a picture of a company that's mature, that's doing this really well, a picture of a company that started out and is moving along that journey, and kind of everything in between on that spectrum. So I love to give real pictures there because I'm a storyteller, but I'm also like an example person. You show me some data, I'm like, yeah, prove it. And so I'll prove it with some stories. So the 4 big things that we promised you, if you walk away with nothing else today, the 4 things we promised you are that adept organizations, companies that have a little bit more rigor, a sharper approach, a more proactive approach to using data in their talent function, those companies differ from others. They are doing things very specifically that make them unique. And here's how they differ from those companies that don't measure or are more ad hoc, or if someone calls me, I'll give them the data, but other than that, it's not really something we share. Here's how those 2 groups differ. So in the next 4 slides, I'll show you the 4 graphs I promised. Number 1, how we upskill our recruiters, how we develop them is the first way they're different. The second one is around DEI, hiring diversity. We, in the last 12 to 18 months as talent leaders, have become the de facto experts on DEI and how to weave that into the business. There's a great company I got to speak with recently where they're one of their talent acquisition leaders, someone said, hey, we're actually doing something over here in another area of the business, completely unrelated to anything talent. Will you help us understand how we can layer in equity and inclusion into that process? So that's a key part of this. We're going to look at recruiting automation. That's a conversation. Again, a lot of headlines about automation, what's happening. We'll bring that home into the recruiting function and what's happening. And then last but not least, that business impact. We want to have impact. I sincerely doubt that any of you woke up this morning and said, I really hope that I'm super transactional and I don't actually lead to any positive outcomes for the business. I just want to do my job. So we'll talk about that piece of it as well and how those things weave together. And then we'll move on into the stories and the examples to really add some context. So number one, I can still remember when I was recruiting in one of my very first recruiter roles. I had one of the leaders come to me and say, hey, I want to put $1 in and get a candidate out, kind of making a joke about how the work that I did was super transactional, just an order taker. And 10 plus years later, that still hurts. That still hurts to think about it because that's how he saw us. He didn't mean it, to be mean or to be hurtful, but it still hurts to think about that because some people in the organization see us as they're just doing this transactional thing. We just tell them to find them and they go find them. And there's so much more to it. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of key skills. They don't realize they're involved in this. And so I want all of us not to be order takers, but to be very strategic, very key advisors and leading to better outcomes for the business. So we looked at this. You'll see right here in the data, we asked about with the new efficiencies caused by technology, with the new tools that are out here, with the new changes in what we can accomplish as a TA function, what does that mean for the skills that we're developing in our recruiting teams, for the skills of our talent acquisition professionals? What does that mean for those? And what we saw is for companies that were ad hoc, they were just kind of data, they were much less likely to say that consultative skills were a key thing that they were going to prioritize in developing their teams. Just like that example I gave you a minute ago from the study a couple of years ago, this is a very recent and fresh example. What we believe drives what we do. And for those that believe and focus and use data on a regular basis, they're much more likely to say, we need our recruiting teams, every single one of them, to be very consultative, to have a great relationship with their business partners. If you're embedded in a business unit, or if you're a center of excellence kind of model, does not matter. They've got to really understand and be able to support them on this very fundamental level, or we're never going to have the impact that we hope to have. We make projections on the value we bring and all the results we can achieve. We're never going to achieve all those results if we don't have that consultative approach. And so those companies that are adept are much more likely, 4.5 times more likely to say this is the biggest priority for us. We are making sure that this isn't just for our TA leaders at an executive level, but for every single person in our recruiting people stack, right? Tech stack, people stack, on the people side of talent acquisition, that they are actually delivering on those things. Very critical. Okay, so that was number one. Number two here, DEI. We asked these companies about how they're actually increasing their hiring diversity. What are you doing? What tools are you using? What strategies, methods, practices, all those things? How are you doing this? You're trying to improve diversity. And don't look at any one specific one. Look here at the light blue and how it outstrips the dark blue in every single option. Every instance in this graph, the light blue outstrips the dark blue. Big picture, that means that companies who are adept, who are focused on the data, are more likely to focus on every potential avenue, every lever we can pull as talent leaders to deliver a more diverse set of candidates to the organization, and to really focus on that and bring it not just in word, everybody talks about it, but in deed, and actually how we're actually tackling this and bringing it into the organization. That's such a powerful thing. One other stat, just by the way, we asked about different ways to balance automation and fairness, because if you read the headlines, automation, AI, things like that, they are potential issue. They create potential issues with bias, right? We all know that. But what we found is we asked companies, how are you balancing this need to automate? Because none of us have unlimited budgets for our people to be able to just throw a bunch of bodies at screening resumes and all these other parts of the process. How do we balance those things out? And what we found was those companies, the primary way that adept organizations do it is they say, we're actually looking at the hiring funnel at specific phases, and we're looking at our diversity candidates going through those individual phases. And so if you find that we have 25% at the first step, but at 7% at the second step, what are we doing to lose a big chunk of those diverse candidates in that next step? So they're using analytics throughout that process to find ways to make sure they're being fair and equitable as they're hiring. So they're critical in there. Number three, on our list. And I didn't ask this, by the way, but as I'm going through, if you're curious about something, you've got a question, throw it in the chat or throw it in the Q&A, sorry. And I'd love to address it, answer it as we're going through. That's my style, is to try to hit those things as we go. So if you've got something you're curious about, please do that. We'll also have time at the end if you'd rather just hit it then. But if something comes up to you, or you're curious about something, or you want to know something deeper about the data, ping me in the Q&A there, and I'll make sure and get to it. Number 3, the value of recruiting automation. One of the questions we asked in this research is, we said, have you seen increased efficiency from all the different things we can use, right? Chatbots and automation and all these other things that we have at our disposal. Have you seen increased efficiency from using those tools? And for those that said, yes, we have, we actually asked those companies to go deeper. What are they doing with that time? Because what I found in the research is simply automating something doesn't create new value. If suddenly you don't have to do this task anymore in your job, if I said, what was the thing you hate the most, and you got to just give that away, right? If you got to just hand that off to an algorithm, that doesn't actually create new value. You're not creating anything new. It's what you do with that time that's freed up that actually adds value back to the business and back to the candidates that you're trying to serve. And so what we found here is similar to the DEI one. Those companies that are adept are looking at every single opportunity to create new value for the candidates, for the hiring managers they're serving, for the business. They're looking for more ways to prioritize those things when that time is freed up from automation. Companies that are ad hoc, they're like, maybe we'll use that time for this or for that, but it's not really as big of a priority for them. So we're really looking for ways to create new value out of the work we're doing. That's what really excites me, by the way. We have so much opportunity to create a more human hiring experience. There's a study in The Guardian that was published a couple of years ago. I cited it in the first edition of my book because when I read it, I got, my face got hot and I got a little bit, flustered. It said, job hunting in the age of AI is grim and dehumanizing. And none of us set out to create a grim and dehumanizing experience for any of the candidates we're trying to serve. And yet sometimes it ends that way if we don't think about the process through the lens of the people and how we're supporting them and how we're communicating to them and how we're making sure they have what they need as we're going through this. Sometimes we end up there, and it's not a good destination to be. So, all right, I'll get all flustered about that one. I'm first one to go to bat and defend the friends that I have in the TA space, because I know the job is really tough and is often thankless. So the fourth one here I want to share with you is business impact. Which of the following describes your TA function? The question we asked, tell us about your function overall, your maturity, your impact. Are you more passive? We kind of take requisitions, we do these things, but we're not really strategic. We're kind of here, right? We're a partner. They can call us if they need us. On the flip side, though, a leading organization from a TA perspective says we are always stepping in whenever there's an opportunity for us to solve a problem using these levers we can pull on the talent side. We're always standing at the ready. We're always jumping in to try to solve for that. And so what we saw in the data is those companies that are data focused are 3.5 times more likely to be one of those strategic partners, really enabling the business to perform and enabling better outcomes for their organization, not just saying, hey, I've got an idea, listen to me, I want to participate, and no one's paying any attention at all. It's the total flip side of that. It's, hey, we want to invite you to this meeting because we've got a problem and you have all these resources at your disposal, all this data, all this insight on the talent side that you can help us to solve this problem. You know as well as I do, many of the times when it comes to a business problem, there's a talent side to that. There's a flip side to that coin. There's the talent related, right? We've got a quality issue. Are we hiring the right people to serve that? We've got a customer service issue. Are we making sure we're screening for the specific behaviors we're looking for? Almost any problem or issue you bring up from a business perspective, I can find a way to tie it back to the work that we get to do as talent professionals. And it's such an exciting place to be because we get to touch on things that everyone else can't in the same kind of way. It's a really powerful way. All right. I had a question pop up really quick I want to address before I slip over to the first case study, first story I want to tell you. Someone said, how can digitally adept recruiters balance the subjective and objective parts of the interview process, right? There's so many parts of the interview process. And one of the things we found in the data was that when companies are trying to solve for, I'll flip back one slide, actually, 2 slides. What we found is that the number one way come to trying to be more focused on equitable hiring, trying to focus on making sure they're doing the right thing by all their candidates, they're actually using something that allows them to see every candidate the same way. We're screening all of them with the same process. They're going this very consistent piece of this. If we actually mash this up together and didn't have it broken out by the 2 different groups, the number one thing in this list is actually just developing a more structured and consistent process that allows us to serve everyone the same way. Everyone gets the same treatment. We're not treating some group differently than another. Everyone gets to make sure they go through the same process and get the same consideration. What's interesting is we had done some research a few years ago on that, because I had heard anecdotally that candidates hate to go through video interviews, or candidates hate to go through assessments in the process. And so we actually talked to and surveyed a group of candidates, said, what are your thoughts on this? And what was really intriguing to me is the candidates actually came back and said, you know what, if I'm doing an assessment that's very general and vague, that has no connection, no line of sight to the actual job I'll be doing, yeah, I hate that. Golly, that's a waste of time. But if I'm doing something that's related to the actual job I'll be doing, if they're asking me if I'm going for a marketing role and they say, hey, how would you plan your marketing budget for the coming year? Or how would you divvy out this stuff to a marketing team? Well, suddenly people love that experience. And what we found was, even if they didn't get the job in that research, even if they did not get it after going through that experience, they felt better about it than some generic, vague sort of shoving them through the process. So we have a chance to do some really, really powerful things there. Great question, by the way. So let's jump on to our first story, give you an example of a company doing this. So one of my favorite ones, I had a chance to talk to the head of hiring at BBVA. They're a major bank and global organization. I don't know if this resonates with any of you, but they had a challenge where their hiring managers were on this planet and their recruiting teams were on this planet, and they could never figure out how to get them to come together. They're always arguing, saying they're not getting the right service, they're not getting the right support. They're saying, I'm doing everything they're asking of me and more, and they're still not happy. And they're trying to figure out how to make them come together. So BBVA actually took this process and put it in place called sprint recruiting. And I'll talk more about the methodology behind that and some of the characteristics, because it's a radical way of looking at and thinking about recruiting that gives us more data and more things to look at. But the result, at the end of the day, after they changed to this new process of agile recruiting, there was more clarity, more predictable outcomes. They knew what to expect on each side. And there was a much, much bigger focus on data and metrics, not just in the recruiting function, by the way, but they made the metrics transparent for every hiring manager and even for levels of leadership above that. So they could kind of keep tabs on what was happening and keep their finger on the pulse of how hiring was going across the organization. So I've got a link there. If you want to go check out, listen to that episode, the interview with that leader, it's a ton of fun, and you'll get some idea of how that looks in his words, not just mine, as we go through this. So I'll tell you more about that model in a little bit. One of the takeaways, though, there is I talked to that leader, and he talks about how much he hates time to fill as a metric. So I don't know about all of you, right? Anybody out there that's also may share that hatred of this, but I'm going to walk you through this. If you're using this as the primary metric, I'll give you a couple ideas about why it's probably a little faulty, why it might be challenging to use that. I'm going to beat up on it a little bit. If you want to beat up on it too, again in the chat, you're welcome to. I'd love to see you do that. Here's the issue with time to fill. Okay, the way we measure it is it's a range, right? We measure when something opens and when something closes, and we give it a number. And that's the entirety of the insight we have into the hiring process, is when that opened and when that closed. We have no other clarification, no transparency, no insight in any part of that. And what I want to see is where's the actual clarity? What happened 99% of that time that we're talking about here? What happened during those times? It doesn't allow us to see what happened. What if a manager sits on that hiring slate for a week, right, and doesn't get back to us? What if our candidates have some sort of emergency? I can't get an interview for an extra week. Well, we didn't close that rec for an extra week because the candidate was driving that. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to report on that. We're the ones who are accountable and on the hook for it. And I'll ask you one here. Is every job the same that you have to recruit for? Is every single role that you're trying to fill exactly the same in terms of the difficulty to find the candidate, the number of skills? No, obviously not. The first job I ever recruited for, when I stepped into a recruiting role, I was thinking, okay, please give me an accountant or an admin or something simple to start with, something that I actually understand. And the first requisition that landed on my desk was for a Black Hawk helicopter instructor pilot. Let me tell you, those people don't grow on trees. It was a challenging experience, and it taught me a lot of things about how to recruit well, how to build relationships. It was a kind of a trial by fire experience. What's interesting though is as I was going through doing those kinds of hires, those kinds of really technical, really specific roles, my boss said, hey, time to fill does not matter to me. We've got to find the right person for this because it is so difficult to find these people. There was actually a role that I had to fill at one point. There were 6 people in the world that were qualified to do it because it was on a very special aircraft that there just weren't that many people around. And so the time to fill was something ludicrous to finally get that role completed. And the whole thing here is wrapped into reporting on that doesn't really matter as much because every job is a little different. And so it all gets just lumped together. And that the average time to fill includes one extreme of very technical, very hard to fill, and one extreme of very simple, repeatable roles that don't require a lot of screening. So I beat up on it a little bit. I'm actually going to skip this one because we've beat up on it enough probably. But I want to just reiterate why this doesn't work. So I've talked about why it doesn't work, what the issues are, why that's a challenge. Now let's flip over to the idea of sprint recruiting. So I mentioned that earlier. I'll give you some examples of how that works, how the data fits in around that, and creates a different picture of what's happening than just a straight time to fill. All right. So let me paint this picture for you. In the sprint recruiting process, managers get a certain number of points every week. Just like Agile in technology, Agile recruiting, managers get a certain number of points and they set the priorities for that week. And so they say, okay, I've got this many roles, I got this many points. I'm going to assign these points out to these jobs that are a big priority because I've got to have them right now. And I'll hold these other 2 jobs for next week, next sprint, where we can come back to that. It's a regular intersection. It's not a once a month touch point or just after a rec closes, but every week, every 2 weeks, there's a connection there to make sure we're on the same page. We're always communicating. If the manager is getting a bunch of candidates in their inbox and they're not responding to that, the recruiters have the authority. It's called a WIP, working process. They have the authority to stop working on a manager's job because the manager has an equal end of this relationship to hold up. And oftentimes it feels like we're doing all the work and they're just kind of coasting. And so it creates this opportunity where we have a little more power as recruiting leaders to say, you're not getting back to me in a timely manner. These candidates are getting off the hook because I've done all this selling of the culture and talking about the company. And when it comes to getting them in front of you, I can't get an interview on your calendar, or you keep pushing me off, or you keep telling me you'll look at them later. And so it's not on the recruiter, honestly. So there's all kinds of interesting things there. And one of the key things I mentioned earlier is there's this dashboard that everyone can see. So everyone knows what's happening at all times. It can be tailored, right, to the recruiter or to the manager. But at a high level, the company's leaders can see where these things are moving and where those roadblocks might be. So it creates this really interesting way of looking at how things go and gives you a clear touch point. What I love about it is it brings this key thing together. There's this principle that marriage counselors actually use when they're trying to bring people and reconcile people back together. One of this principle they use is, let's stop having this person fighting against that person about something, but let's have these people fighting together against something else. So instead of us fighting about it, it's us fighting together, joining arms, linking arms, and going against whatever is out there. I have a very good friend who used to be the head of talent acquisition for H&R Block. And she had a similar story, right, to most of us, where the hiring managers just didn't get it. Hey, I need this role filled in 3 weeks. I got to start this person. I need you to go figure that out. The way she approached that is she had already kind of told them, I said, we can't do that. And they just didn't hear her. So she said, hey, come by, have a seat with me. We'll look at this together. And she showed them what the funnel looked like. She printed it out, right, in the long form, page by page, and showed them what the funnel looked like. Said, okay, to get that set of candidates you're looking for at the end, it takes us this many at screening, this many at resumes, this many at the very top of the funnel. And she backed into, it's not just me calling 3 people and 3 people showing up. We have to call 100 people, or screen 100 resumes in order to get the 3 people that you're going to ultimately hire. And so it created this opportunity. The light bulb goes off. They realize, wow, this is, I just didn't have this insight before. And it all came back to the data. It wasn't, I feel like you don't listen to me. It wasn't, I think you're, no, it was, here's what the actual data shows. I want to zip it and see what you think about that. And it allowed them to create this common ground where they came together to fight again against something else instead of always being back and forth at each other. This also helps not just at that level of working with our hiring managers, but also at a higher level in the business, at a more strategic level as well. One of the key things, one of the key principles of using data is that you have to go to your leaders and understand what makes them tick, what excites them, but also what scares the pants off of them. What sort of things keep them up at night? This is where you prioritize what you're measuring. If they're worried about this certain thing, again, a business related thing, figure out how to tie your data, the things you have back into that, and you can use that as an indicator that they care about. Maybe they care about a certain role. This role is critical to the success of our company in the next quarter. Filling this role is going to mean everything for us. I talked to an organization 2 years ago we were trying to build digital teams. We need to have these certain types of skill sets, and they kept capping out how fast they could grow because they'd hire a couple, they'd grow, and they'd stop until they hired a few more. So that was a key role. So they started reporting up, here's who we have in the funnel that are fits for these roles. And they were able to get some real clarity there from their executive team on that progress as they went. That's powerful to be in those conversations and for them to be calling in, asking you for those insights on a regular basis. That's really a great place to be. And remember what the data showed. I showed you some of those charts earlier. The teams that prioritize data are much more likely to be building those consultative relationships with their leaders. They're much more likely to say, this is a priority for us, not just a nice to have, but as a critical piece of how we serve the things that they need from us. Speaking of executive leadership, I'll give you another story really quick, just a really short one on this one. This is actually a quote from a CEO talking about his company's hiring activities. Right, this is a case study from a Lever customer, Full Stack Labs. I talk about BBVA. They're a really big company. This is actually a small company. Well, if you're a small or mid-sized firm listening to me now, you're like, well, that's great for them, but what about us? Again, executive clarity. This is a quote from their CEO talking about, we can identify talent at a faster rate and enables us to grow and hit our goals as an organization. It's a powerful, powerful conversation there. The company was trying to grow, was in this accelerated hiring mode, and they were hiring as fast as they could, but with the tools they had before, it was like, we can hire, 5 people a month, essentially, because it's hard to find them. And we all know how difficult it is to fill software talent. And once they got some more greater clarity, better analytics, better tools in place, they were able to hire double that throughput to 10 people a month. And for them, as a small team, that was really, really incredible. That was really powerful. And it didn't just say, whew, we kept those people happy, those hiring managers happy, but we were able to grow as an organization to meet the demand that our customers place on us. This opens up the opportunity, though, for other questions to be asked. So if you're thinking about what things do my leaders care about, your operations leaders, your CEO, your CFO, those people who are key leaders in the organization, what things are worrying them, here's some things you might not have answers to right now, but you might be curious about. How many recruiters does it take to fill a certain number of jobs? How do we know who's performing as a recruiter? How do we know which ones are the best? Which ones could use a little bit of help or support or upskilling? How do we know those things? Because if we're measuring with some of the common metrics, we might not have any clarity into that. How do we keep our hires from becoming quick quits, QQs? Right? How do we help make sure that they don't join us and leave a month later? Because I don't know about you, but that's about the biggest kick in the gut when you spent all this time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears trying to find the right candidates. And the second you get them in, 6 weeks later, they've bailed, they've taken off. That hurts because you have to start that all over again, but you poured all that into the process to make sure you found the right person. We weren't faking it the first time. We were giving it our all, and it really hurts to lose them. So how do we keep them from becoming quick quits? I'm going to tell you a story about OPower. I talked about them earlier in terms of a company that started out saying, we don't know what we're doing, but we want to get better at it. And so if you're one of those companies that's saying, I want to get better at it, I want to do this, I want to understand data, I want to figure out how to do that, I'll give you some examples of how they answered these specific questions right here on the screen, how they answered every one of these within their own function, because these were things their leaders were asking, and When they asked them, the head of HR, the head of TA, they just kind of looked at each other. They didn't know how to answer them. So we'll talk about how to tackle those things. How many recruiters does it take to fill a certain number of jobs? Well, I hinted at this one earlier when I talked about being able to measure time to fill for different types of roles. You and I know that every job isn't created the same. Every rec isn't the same. Some require a different amount of time. Some of them require us to fish and source in different places. So what they did is they actually built this quadrant model for them. Said, okay, if it's a quadrant 1, it's pretty simple role, right? The talent is plentiful. It's easy to find them. Usually when you post one of those, you get a lot of applications. On the other end of that spectrum, maybe it's a very technical type of role, or it's really difficult to fill. So when we post this, we've got to go out and fill that pipeline, because people don't just happen across it who are highly qualified and ready to take that on. So they use skill set and the frequency to kind of build this out. And it allowed them to see how many people, and very predictably measure and forecast how many people it took to fill this role. What's interesting, I've mentioned predictability a couple times in this, and I don't know about you, but I've had times where I'm recruiting where it feels like you're a firefighter, you go put this fire out, and the second it's out, you start to take a breather, and suddenly you realize there's another one right behind you, go put that one out. And it's a constant running from fire to fire. And this allowed them to be a little more proactive and think about and plan for, hey, you know what? We actually have a large number of these type roles that we know take a lot more time. So we're going to have to bring in some external resources. We'll have to hire someone part-time to help us out, or we'll have to get a new database, or all those kind of questions. But until you have that clarity, you don't know what questions to ask or to think about how to take that next step. What this one? Measuring recruiter performance. How do you know which one of your recruiters are actually delivering the right value, delivering on the picture that they're painting in terms of their performance that you're hoping? So here's an example from, again, this company, Opower, their dashboard, how they were looking at their recruiters. And we're going to look at Sally and Bob really quick and look at this. So if you look out at the far right side, the far right column, you see Sally's taken 110 days to fill a job. But Bob, he's doing it in 65 days. Like he looks like he's doing a better job than she is. But when you start moving across, hey, wait a minute, they're hiring the same number of people too. Okay, well, that's interesting. And you move a little farther left. Average point value. So I told you the point values. The more points something is, the harder it is to fill that. She is filling one of the highest point values in terms of difficulty compared to all the other people on the recruiting team. And she's doing that. She's still filling the same number of jobs, number of hires per quarter, as someone doing a lot easier jobs relative to that. So there's all these different ways we can start looking at this and seeing how are we doing, who's doing well, who's suited for the kind of recruiting that they're doing, and who might need to be put into a different type of role. We found that, wow, Sally is really terrible at hiring these transactional type roles, but she's great at building rapport with technical candidates. So we're going to put her in that direction. So that helps us to make all kinds of decisions. Once we have the data, it allows us to have different conversations and have some clear and informed decision-making processes. All right, and one last thing I'll show you from Opower, from their story, because I think this is an interesting way of looking at it. How do we know who's going to stick around? There are so many factors. There's a million things that factor into someone's decision to stay with a company. Things that we do before they ever start with us on day one, they have some impact, but it's not the only thing that matters. But what else do we have at our disposal that we can use as a way to predict who's going to stick around? So one of the things they used, they started looking at who's retaining, who's sticking around based on the source of hire. And what they found was something really intriguing. They had assumed that, hey, if we're bringing this person in, and our recruiters are really selling the company, and we're doing a great job of bringing them into our culture and understanding who we are, they thought they were going to stick around longer. What you find is the people that were sourced by a recruiter are the least likely to stick around at the very bottom of this list. The ones who stayed the longest were interns and referrals. They were able to do these things. One of the key things, I'm doing some research last week, this week, next week. There's a little mini project I'm doing right now about how companies are responding to the crazy talent market that we're in, frankly, right now. And one of the things that I've heard from every single one of them, 3 different executives, 3 different companies, they said, we have to try something we've never done, because everything we're doing is what we've always done, and it's got us where we are. So we got to try something different. This is an example of that, where we think, okay, we've got to hire more people. They've got to stick around longer. Suddenly it's the big priority for us. And we think we just got to hire more people or screen them a different way. But it turns out maybe the answer to this is a long play. It's not an immediate solution, but it's a long play of we need to do more interns. Or we need to look at more referrals, because in this case study, this example, this is real data from the company. That's what would have led long term to them being able to keep a steady pipeline and bench of qualified talent. But we often think of, we've got the tools that are, when you're a hammer, every problem's a nail. We think we're recruiters, so we just got to go recruit more, source more, look for more candidates. And it might be we need to think about it in a different kind of way. So I love this example because it really leads to some great insights into what's happening inside the organization. So I've got a couple recommendations for you, and then I'm going to stop and take a second because there's a queue of questions that have been lining up in the last few minutes. If you've got anything that you're curious about, go and pop it in there. But there's a queue of questions I want to get to very shortly. One of the things I want to tell you, I told you part of today was not just giving you some tools and things to think about, and some ideas to go and experiment with, but also some encouragement. So there was a study done a few years ago about retirement savings, of all things, okay? And they looked at those people who had a considerable amount of savings compared to those who didn't. And they looked at everything you can imagine to try to guess why that was. They looked at savings rates, and they looked at the fees and the expenses and the investment returns and all these kinds of things. The one thing that was most predictive of someone having a large balance in their retirement at the end of a working career wasn't any of those things. It was savings rate, participation rate. It was how often they actually just did it. They got in and they just kept on doing it and kept on doing it and kept on doing it for a long time. And that predicted whether they're going to have a large balance, not whether they had the very fine-tuned, just the exact perfect mix of things, or they had the ratio just right. None of those technical things actually had much to do with it at all. The vast majority had to do with it. They just got in and started. Just like the story I started out with today, I want to encourage you to get into this and start it. There's very few things you can do when it comes to measurement that are going to be like fatal failures. You're just going to fall flat on your face and no one's going to trust you anymore. I would encourage you to start small, to think about those things that are low-hanging fruit, the things that matter to your leadership team, and jump on those things, because they exist, they're out there, they already know what they're thinking about. You might just not know yet what those are. So I talked about that a little bit already. Find out what matters to your leadership team, not to phone a friend, their team, not to something you read in the news, but ask your leaders. Sometimes it's a little bit nerve-wracking to go in and say, hey, I need to know what you're thinking about, the things that are worrisome for you, the things that are keeping you awake at night. Sometimes it feels weird to ask that, like we should already know it. But it builds better relationships saying, I don't know these things, but to serve you best and to serve the candidates that are out there that we want to take care of, I need to know the answers to these questions. That's going to create some great conversations for you. You're going to measure, you're going to report, you're going to pick a couple of things, maybe some of the things we talked about today. Maybe there's something specific for your company that's like, ooh, here's an idea that would wrap into this and allow me to, whatever it is, start measuring that and reporting on it. Don't try to do massive dashboard with 50 different metrics all at once. Start very small. Answer one question for one business leader. Do it on repeat, and you'll start having other leaders saying, hey, can I get that too? Can I get that insight? How do we get that? That sprint recruiting example I gave you earlier, they actually started in one business unit just as a test run because it was so radically different from how they've been recruiting. And other hiring managers started hearing about it and saying, hey, when are we going to get that over here? They wanted that, even though it gave them more accountability, more responsibility. They wanted that because it gave them more clarity, and they wanted to be together with their teams. And then over time, you can add other metrics, other numbers, things like that. But you've got to do this. You've got to focus on those things, because otherwise we're just going to be churning. It'll always be the fighting fires. It'll always be reactive. And again, none of us wake up in the morning saying, I hope that I get to put out another fire today. I want to have an impact. All of us want to finish the day satisfied. We made an impact on the candidates that we're serving, the hiring managers that we're working alongside, and the business. We want to lead to better outcomes there. And it's hard to see that progress over time sometimes, but doing this, using data, will allow you to do that. It's an enabler of that change, and it's also an outcome of that change. You start to get closer to some of those things. All right, I want to take a quick breather. There we go. I'm going to take a quick breather, catch your breath for a second. Steve's going to say hello for a second, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to check the questions and answer a few for you.
Thanks, Ben. Very persuasive material here. At this point in the program, Ben will be answering some more questions that you submitted via the Q&A button. But before I turn things back over to him, I want to tell you one more time about a special opportunity in case you missed it at the top of the program. Our next monthly virtual conference is coming up on Wednesday, August 18th, and it's titled Learning from a Crisis About What Working Parents Need. It's aimed specifically at HR and benefits leaders who want to know what their employees need from them right now. Thanks to our partners and today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for you. I am putting the link in the chat space one more time. The regular price is $149 for these, but this link will give you a free ticket for the whole day's activities. Okay, thanks for checking that out. And now I'll send it back over to Ben to answer more of your questions. Ben, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Okay, looking at some questions here. There's quite a few of them, so I'll go through and try to hit on what I can in the next nine and a half minutes we have together. Thank you, by the way, for everybody that submitted one. And if you've got another one, again, pop it in there. We'll get to it best I can. So Michelle had a great question. She said, any advice for those of us who are trying to help place or align a disabled but qualified individual with these opportunities? And I would encourage you, Michelle, when you're trying to connect these individuals, if you remember the study I mentioned a minute ago where people get a chance to show what they can do, right? I would look for those organizations that are going to give you a chance to show what you can do. Because the second that some companies find out that someone has a disability, they kind of lean back, they're not sure, they start to second guess the decision. But if you allow someone to step in there and say, hey, I've shown you what I can do. I've done this assessment and it proves that I have the right cognitive abilities. Or I've done this assessment that matches against your high performers and it shows I'm a high performer. Those things become a great lever to step into that conversation and be able to have some authority there and to feel like you have a little bit more clout and credibility in the discussion instead of it feeling like I'm trying to push someone to do something they don't want to do. You've already showed them the person's a great candidate that fits the role, and now it's on them to take that and help make that decision alongside you. There was a recruiting team I worked with about 2 years ago. They had the problem, and I don't know if any of you resonate with this, they had a problem where hiring managers had the list of 87 things they had to have in every candidate, and some of them were just arbitrary. They had to be from this school, or they had to have that competitor experience. And so what they did is they actually brought in a set of 4 different candidates and put them in the front of the room. The hiring manager sat at the back taking notes, and the recruiter just asked them some interview questions broadly. Tell me about yourself. What's your experience related to this? How have you solved that problem in the past? And at the end of that short interview, the manager said, okay, I want to talk to candidate number 2 and number 6, or number 2 and number 4. And only then did they get their actual resume to find out about those candidates. And they found out that some of those things that were must-haves, those candidates didn't have. They'd already committed to going forward and talking more with that candidate one-on-one. And so that's an example that allowed them to get around some of those specific requirements that were just arbitrary and didn't actually match up to the job. It's a great question. Thank you, Michelle, for that one. All right. So how about this one? Recruiters want to be proactive about talent needs that managers might not even be anticipating. Ooh, great question. What are their options in terms of research? So I would encourage you, if you have, you see the space kind of changing, or you're hearing from candidates that things are changing a little bit, and your hiring managers are just focused on, again, I'm doing a job and I've got to just recruit or fill this role so I can come back and do the job some more. If they're not pulling their head back and taking a look around and surveying the landscape to see how things are changing, I would use some of that input from the candidates to help guide those conversations. I believe I mentioned Dominique from Takeda today in the conversation. If I didn't, I met her last year. She was a TA leader, and she stepped into the head of DEI at Takeda for North America recently. She's a brilliant lady. And one of the things that she had done is she actually used conversations from the candidates where candidates were asking about DEI initiatives in the company. How are you prioritizing this? How are you walking the walk instead of just talking about it like a lot of other companies they're running across? And she used that evidence from feedback from candidates in the process to say, this is something we've got to train every hiring manager to have some sort of answer to this that we agree with, that takes in our perspective as a company. So she used those inputs from those candidates to help frame that next step and to frame some sort of training, communication back out to the hiring managers, so all of them knew what the company perspective on that was, because it kept coming up over and over. It just was occasionally, it started out with just kind of one here, one there, but then it was consistent, and hiring managers were calling her like, I'm not sure how to answer this, I need your help. And so she was able to use that as a way. That's a great example probably of how to bring that back together. The other thing I'd say is we talked a lot about this relationship today, working alongside your hiring managers, not just fighting against each other, but working together towards a goal. Ask them, hey, if something starts coming up, some new skill or something that you're seeing that's kind of interesting or that I might need to know about, let me know. Throw a flag on that one so I know what to be looking for, because they can also be an early warning sign if they are having a deeper conversation about qualifications and they realize that there's something that you didn't realize you didn't know about. Excellent question. All right. Someone said, could you explain, so in the O-Power case study, why those recruiter source employees didn't retain as well as those from other sources? That's a great question. I don't have the exact data from O-Power to tell you here's what those things were. I will tell you that in general, what we've seen are when people spend some time and get to know your company and get to see how you operate and your culture and all those kinds of things, those people kind of buy in and they're more willing to stick around. We know there's so much data. One of my favorite areas to do research on is talent mobility and how we move people in the business. To be honest with you, it has been so exciting the last year or two to see that conversation has started to be brought up to me from TA leaders, because in the past it was always someone head of HR or someone in learning development saying, how do we move people in the business? Increasingly of late, it's been talent acquisition leaders saying, we want to find a way to move people and hire from within. And so that's been an exciting place to be. The thing that I would say, though, again, the reason that matters, the reason that's powerful, is there's so much data that say it's less costly, it's less risky, it leads to better outcomes, performance, it leads to the person sticking around longer. All these kind of data points that prove that looking for people within the business is a powerful way to do our hiring and to augment all the other stuff we're doing on the external recruiting side. So I'd probably say that's a big part of why the internal conversions, intern conversions, and other referrals, things like that coming in were a better fit and stuck around longer, because they had some sort of connection there that they had built over time, instead of feeling like they came in, they didn't know anyone, they ended up leaving a shorter time after that. Oh, goodness. Elizabeth, I feel you, okay? She said, my managers don't care who they hire. They just want to fill the role, put a butt in a seat. And I think all of us can probably agree with you. We've faced that at some point. I want to tell the candidate it's not the best fit, what I do. What I would encourage you to do is, let's come back to the data, okay? Because right now it's your opinion versus the manager, and that's a really hard place to be. I would encourage you to go back and look at some data and say, when we actually did the right vetting, we did the right selection, here's how long someone stayed, and here's what their performance looked like. Whereas if we just hired the first person that showed up and could breathe, here's how long they stayed, and here's what their performance looked like. And start looking for some data like that to help you tell that story. And it can help you to get them to see this, when right now it's just, they see you as being hard to get along with. It's a very rational question. It's one of those things that all of us deal with, but I would encourage you to try to use some data to bring that story to them. You can use external benchmarking and external information, some of the studies and stats I've mentioned today, but showing them live data from within your organization to show how that matters and how that's impacted things in the past, that can create a better dialogue. Instead of just telling them they're wrong, even if they are wrong, because they're wrong, come at it with, hey, look, I've actually found some really helpful information that might help us to make better decisions here. How can I help make sure we're doing the right vetting? Because it seems like that's the right step. In that O-Power case study, one of the things I didn't tell you, they looked at their company performance data for all their workers, and they found that those people who had gone through 5 or more interviews, which seems like a ton these days, okay, but for their company at that stage when they were hiring, 5 interviews or more, those people were more likely to perform better than people who had been in 4 or fewer interviews. There was no correlation to performance for those people who'd been in fewer. But if they've been in 5 or more, they performed better on the job than anyone else did. So they use that as their benchmark there to help show what was working and what wasn't. And I see we're getting really close on time. I might be making Steve sweat over there. We have so many other great questions from Linda and others. I appreciate all of you for chiming in. I'll try to figure out this way we can get those some answers back to you, because I appreciate all of you for taking the time to ask, and I wish we had a little more time to dive into some of those things. Steve, I'm going to pass the baton back to you. Thank you to everybody for hanging out with us today. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben, for an excellent presentation. And thanks again to our sponsor, Lever, the Talent Acquisition Suite, and to all of you who participated today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of these events on our calendar. I will tell you about 2. Next Thursday, August 12th, same time, same place, we'll be talking about hiring for teams with the right combination of soft skills, things like problem solving and conflict resolution and all those things that are tricky to measure. On Wednesday, August 18th, as I mentioned earlier, is our full scale virtual conference, which will focus on what HR leaders need to know right now about what working parents want to show up for work and get the parenting done too. So visit our website at fromday1.co to learn more about these. Thanks everyone, and stay well.